All right. Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Mike Privet from Return on Security, and it is my great pleasure today to be joined by Max, the founder of LimaCharlie, to talk about this really great product launch and the new future of AI and security operations and what it means for all of us. But just to give a little bit of background of those who don't know Max, he's been in the cyber industry for a very long time, worked at some of the biggest companies you could think of: Google, CrowdStrike, Arcadia, even worked for the Canadian National Defense, and has really seen a lot in this space. So I'm really excited to have you join today, Max, and can't wait to hear about everything Lima Charlie's planning.
I'm very happy to be here. I think it's going to be a good discussion.
Excellent, excellent. So, all right, to set the scene a little bit too, obviously AI and cyber is not new. We've heard nothing but AI for the last several years, it seems like. And we've seen many kind of ups and downs, right? Many waves on technology trends and what it means for cyber or what it doesn't mean. But at the same time, that there's been tons of money invested in this space, but the values and all that of coming out of it are still being determined every day. They're still changing, and this is true for not just security, but also for the broader AI industries. But we're still figuring out, how this thing works, so to speak. So with that, I'd love to turn it to you and ask, why now is the right time to go in on AI and the SecOps space and your take on it?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I think you're totally right there. At this point, it's become pretty clear that there is a lot of value behind AI, but I feel like we've had a hint that there was some really great value behind AI for a while now. And I feel like we've kind of gone through the first wave of that excitement and the like, hey, it really feels like there's something there. Let's build, solutions. And the reality of it is that we found that like some of those solutions, got outpaced by the advancement of the capabilities in AI. And I think in and of itself, that is kind of like the biggest learning here, meaning the learning isn't like, oh, this is the way that you make a tool with AI that, is like the best, but rather we've kind of all learned as an industry, like, oh, okay, this thing just moves fast. It keeps moving fast. What do we need to index on so that we build solutions and products that kind of are viable within this worldview that like things are moving fast? And so that's where I think we're taking a lot of this as a really deep learning to say, okay, how are we going to, how should cybersecurity be structuring what it does with AI so that it's future proof? I know I don't like the sounding of that, but like that it's future proof, so that we get value today, but we also keep getting value. We don't paint ourselves in a corner. So that's kind of like I think the biggest part of that timing for me.
That makes sense. I mean, obviously, as you were saying that too, it dawned on me just how quickly software development has changed and how quickly features come out now. What seemed to take, the better part of a year or multi-year strategies for a roadmap can now be done sometimes in a weekend, which kind of blows my mind. So, with that, I'd love to hear, can you tell us more about, what you guys have been building, how you have been using AI, and like, what does it look like?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, it kind of touches on timing, like just to very brief kind of history lesson, not lesson, but, going over the history a bit. In the past year, we've seen MCP come out, right? So MCPs come out. It had a really big impact, but there was a bunch of solutions prior to MCP that like weren't using it. I think everybody saw that there was value. Everybody, built things. But then there was that secondary realization over the year that, hey, MCP turns out is not the answer to all of the problems, right? So it is a great way to enable people to go and connect, very basic, simple things into the AI. But if we take a step back and we say, okay, how do we leverage this at scale? How do we build long lasting solutions on that? The story gets a lot more murky because what we found, very basic example, right? Like what we found is we had about 120, I believe, tools that we have onto our platform, like APIs, stuff like that we wanted to bring to the MCP server, and we very quickly realized that that's not viable. I think we were consuming about 70,000 tokens in the context window right off the bat. So it was just a no-go. So that was a huge wave of learning. I think most of the industry now realizes this. There's there's been some movement on the frontier labs into introducing kind of the next generations of solutions that address that. And so I think all of those things are now, coming together where we have a stack, a technical stack in AI that we can say with credibility, yeah, you can now kind of bring all of your tool set and make this work, and make it work in a fairly generic way, meaning you're not building, your own one-off product against like an API that is fundamentally going to change. And I think that was kind of like wave number one of product in cybersecurity. But I think now we're at the stage where we can truly say, okay, we can see how all those things survive in the future and how they're viable to build a product. So that is why that's how we got to where we are today, and we were able to bring in 120 something tools and really start to, for us, make a big statement and say, AI is kind of now a valid operator onto the platform, and we believe that it will continue to be a valid operator for the future on the same, on par with users through the web API or API users.
Got it. Interesting. It sounds like also perhaps the receiving entities or the people who are working with the security tools are probably a bit more adept than in previous technology iterations, or maybe they're just leaning in a bit more. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've gone. Like, if I think about those waves, right? We've gone through an initial wave of products that were mostly standalone products built onto a very, very primitive way of accessing LLMs, and that were each re-implementing their own, doing very basic tool calling, meaning, like, hey, get this part of the data from this thing. And that was okay because it did not really require any knowledge or understanding from users, right? Like it was a chatbot, very simple, fine. Over time, over the last year, what we've seen is that along with MCP, there's another big change that happened, which is the adoption of the CLI tools. So Claude Code kind of being the first one out there that was like you're getting a lot of wide adoption. They introduced a new paradigm that is now, I can't say it's standard because it's very far from true that everybody's used it, but we can now all see identify the value behind it, and a lot of people have been using it, particularly in software engineering. But both the frontier labs as well as a lot of people in security have had that realization that although this tool was built for software engineers initially, it's kind of, I think it's the browser moment. It's the moment where, hey, we have the browser. It's kind of this very specialized thing for like this thing called the web, and it's really kind of like narrow and obscure. And then people realize, oh wait, I can use this for so many different things. And so we're seeing that with the CLI tools. We're seeing a lot of people running a lot of security operations with those tools. And for those that those at home that haven't used this, the big concept here is not just to have a chatbot that has access to a couple of common use cases that are built into it, but instead it's this idea of saying, look, the models are now good enough that we can provide it with the fundamental tools that can be used in the trade as they are today. So that can be, terminal applications, but it can also be, APIs on security platforms like ours. And the models are now good enough to be able to orchestrate of their own what they're looking for. And so focusing on the outcomes is a big mental shift. And so we're seeing people now run security operations that way. I think that's kind of the biggest shift. And, I don't know what percentage of people have been using it, but we've seen that it's a game changer.
Yeah, it makes sense. And honestly, that kind of evolution from everything gets a chatbot, like every chatbot is very limited scope of operations. It was kind of I think probably a needed first step, but it was definitely a first step. And because not every, what do you do when every product has a chatbot? Do you make them talk to each other? Like how does that work? It just kind of needs that higher level kind of operation. So I know that's something you've been thinking about a bunch too, is like kind of that evolution from more autonomous operator or like operator as opposed to just chatbot assistant. Is there any more you can share, like how you're thinking around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is, it sounds like a subtle distinction, I think, until you actually start to use it. I think there's a reason, there's a technological reason why the chatbot started. There's also a industry reason, a business reason. This was kind of the launch of AI. I think security folks saw some really interesting cases in software engineering, like Cursor, right? Like getting crazy valuations. And so I think as an industry, we kind of jumped to the question of like, which company do I need to fund that has the product that's going to achieve the same thing? The difference is that we focused on the adoption and not on, the creation of that product and not necessarily the value right away. So I think that's why this kind of next wave is a lot more interesting. And it comes with these technological changes. So the difference is that, kind of dig in a little bit deeper, is that if you're building for specific use cases, right? I'm building so that I can ask this type of question to my chatbot and it's able to answer it. That's good, but it means that you are going to be building use case after use case after use case. This is a very much like a typical old school product development, like life cycle. And that's fine. That's how we've operated for the past 20 years, 30 years. But AI introduces kind of an escape hatch out of a lot of these things, right? It's very different. And I think if we operate in that old school way, we're missing the mark. The whole point of AI is this adaptability. It's the reasoning that it's able to do behind the scenes. And so taking the approach of saying, here's hundreds of tools, let me describe what outcome I want, and you find a way to achieve it, that is magical. Because now it means that we can start to get the value from AI regardless of the area that you're looking at, right? Like the people we're working with don't, we work with a lot of service providers, and so don't look at this necessarily as, hey, I need to be able to do alert triage. And like alert triage is great, but there's so many other things out there that suck time, that are, not fun, that people are not efficient about. And so being able to say, we are going to be able to address all of those at the same, in the same way at the same time. And it is not a question of we need to build a whole product around this one use case. That's a game changer. I think it's how we kind of break out of the loop that was SOAR, right? Like, because, the early chatbots are very close to SOAR. They're kind of SOAR with some fuzziness is how I'd think about it. and like, it's not bad, but that's not where the real magic is.
Wait, so you're telling me that adding a chatbot to everything does not increase shareholder value? I'm not sure I believe you.
It's a great way. Yeah, it's a great way to say that you have an AI story. Right. But like not necessarily the best. Yeah, it's not bad, but I've
got to update some investment memos after this call. But so like this is kind of a good segue too, because talking about the product evolution and talking about how some of these, especially like incumbents who were not necessarily AI native or whatever the terminology you want to use, like they came out using it. Many of which who either acquired companies that were chatbots or built chatbots themselves. How do you think, or how do you view that being kind of fundamentally different to what this new kind of operator style model being, and like how do you think the day-to-day changes?
So I think there's a few things, right? There's a few different categories of players at the moment in that space. I don't mean categories and product category. I mean more in the nature of those players. So number one, I think, I kind of think about like the AI SOC. And I think that's kind of the one we've been mostly kind of sort of referring to, meaning those are brand new startups. And they are attempting to leverage AI, and AI is the product, right? Like as a new startup, you have to make money, you have to have a moat. The idea that you're going to be training those models or like building that model, I think is not realistic anymore. The frontier labs have kind of proven this year that however good you might be at building your own model, in a generic way, the frontier labs are just going to outpace you. They've kind of reached escape velocity. The other part of this is the secondary challenge is that for those companies, they themselves don't have the capabilities, meaning they have the AI, they have the knowledge, they have experts, but they don't have the I don't know, like the SIM or the EDR or the name it, right? So what we're seeing in the industry is that it's a little bit of a regression to the same issue that we've seen service providers having. So LimaCharlie works so many service providers, which is everybody on day one starting a service provider wants to support everything out there, and that's it's a great philosophy, right? Like it's good. Ideally, we don't want to force anybody to do anything, but the reality is, at your 10th EDR and your 10th SIM and your 10th name the product, you start to realize that that's not tenable. And so I feel like that, the AI SOC kind of, approached this with, with the innovation spirit, which is great, right? Like, hey, we think AI is going to be able to do that. But I think in reality, they're finding that it's still really problematic because it implies that they still need to build a lot of infrastructure. And that's kind of what we've observed even at the MCP level. We've seen a lot of those early companies build a lot of infrastructure to, like connect with this provider, connect with that provider. And then MCP happened, and they had already built so much infrastructure that they were kind of like, oh, what should we be doing? So anyway, so that's kind of category number one. I think it's very challenging. Actually, the last part I think that's kind of worth calling out is for anybody that's tried to use that is the cost, right? Because you're dealing with a startup that has to make money and has to have a moat. It means on the moat part, right? It means that it's going to be a black box. Because they need to have a moat. The underlying model is not going to be the moat because the frontier labs are going faster. There's very few places where you can really, like put your moat. And on the money side, it's just crazy expensive, right? Because they're going to be selling the AI. So they're going to be selling per token or some proxy metric like per alert. And that's really hard. It's crazy expensive. So, that's a really tough area, especially when you start to look at this and you say, what about for service providers? So now that cost that you had, right, as an enterprise, and you start saying, I've got 4,000 customers, like just nope, right off the bat. The second big kind is the legacy big fives, right? The ones that kind of build a new product every week because they get to have the SKU, and then large enterprise can say, yep, I checked the box, I have the SKU now, and kind of this perpetual machine now. So that would be like the CrowdStrikes and the Palo Altos, the huge guys. They have the capabilities. So that's great, right? When we compare that. That being said, there are also public companies, incentive to go and say, okay, AI must be a product, because this needs to be a new SKU that we start selling. So there's still kind of that slant of, well, it's not necessarily about the outcome. It's kind of very much product first. Fine. The other issue, the real issue, I think that they're hitting is that they have been building for people for a really long time, right? So if you look at a CrowdStrike, all of them, it's a lot of growth through acquisition. It's a lot of bundling, right? They're mostly bundlers. Meaning they will go to a company and sell this product and that product and that product. They've been built in silos. They're put under a web portal, and it's kind of close enough to say that it kind of works together. And so that's their space. So when they look at the product that they want to build, they're going to look at the chatbot, and they're going to say, what are the use cases that we're going to sell our customers? Well, use case number one is this. Use case number two is this. And then they're going to have to build the APIs behind it, the access layers, a lot of things, because they were built for humans clicking through a web portal. And so that's, again, right, it goes back to the problem of being kind of sore with a little bit of fuzziness. So I think that's kind of the structure. Candidly, we have stumbled in a way into the right pattern for us, right? LimaCharlie is a hyperscaler for security operations, meaning we've built as a cloud provider. So API first. And when we say API first, we really truly mean it, right? We're APIs, and we happen to have a web portal. And so this turns out to be the way at this point in time to be able to leverage all of those capabilities and let the AI be this operator of those capabilities. Look, a year ago, that was not the case, right? A year ago, you could not give, whatever GPT version was out there, full access to those tools. But now we're absolutely there. And it means that now viewing the AI as an operator means that you get access to the value across the whole stack. It's not just about doing alert triage or about doing this or about doing that and waiting for the vendor to release the product that does AI for onboarding new customers. No, it just means you can ask it to go and take care of onboarding or take care of triage or take care of doing this weird operation that one of your customers has asked you. You can kind of like do all of it when it's an operator. You focus on the outcome.
Yeah, that makes sense too. And honestly, something you said that kind of stuck with me too is AI doing a lot of the operating now, and how most of the software we've used in the industry is built for ClickOps, which was kind of the only way. Of course, there were some CLI entry points, but it wasn't always made for kind of mass scale. I would say automation, yes, but not orchestration, not coordination across things. And I know service providers, MSSPs or MDR operators are like some of your biggest customers. So can you tell us a little bit more of like, what does it mean for them, especially as they're, very price sensitive, they're scale sensitive, they're speed sensitive, all these things. Like, what does it mean?
Absolutely. So it means a few different things. It means a few different things, right? I think the aspects are, you touched on like the margins that, if you're a service provider, it's your margins. It's your product. It's how you do business, right? So it's not just some cost center that, you kind of have to be careful about. Around the product, the product for an MSSP, for a service provider, is the service itself. And so I think it's a big part of the discussion. Let's start with the basics. The ability to pay per token always exists. It's always possible. All of the frontier labs kind of like, push this forward. You can do it. However, one of the realizations that we had was that a lot of the operations here, are rely on an analyst or a human operator to go and say, like, I want to have this outcome. And these are flows that are currently supported by the CLI tools that I mentioned, with some scaffolding, some things kind of put around that, which we are putting open source, we're putting out there. But the fundamental, like, key difference here is the frontier labs like Anthropic have their own subscriptions, right? They have subscription service that you can say, I'm going to pay $100 a month and I get near infinite-ish, use of the model. I don't have to pay per token. I don't have to think about it, like all that stuff. So it transforms for a service provider how you look at the economics, right? Prior to, the LimaCharlie kind of strategy here, you would have had to say, okay, we have an average of 100 alerts a day per tenant, and we have X tenants. So how many tokens or how many dollars per alert? Okay, $5 per alert and then you make that equation and then you cry yourself to sleep and decide not to do it. The new way is now you can say, hey, it's $100 a month. This is the $100 a month, per analyst, right? So it's not purely $100 a month. But now you can predict exactly what your costs are going to be without having to worry about kind of the what happens if one of my tenants goes crazy or anything like that. So that's a big part of it. What you get from that is access to not just, like we were saying, like a single use case, but it's to an infinite, honestly, number of use cases, right? It's the ability for you to go and say things like, here's a couple of examples, right? So, hey, I have a customer that is currently, we're authenticated with a bunch of CLI tools. They have some Azure footprint, some AWS. They use, Azure AD, and they use this and Okta and that, blah, blah, blah. the ability for a junior analyst, like a level one, to actually go and say, hey, AI, like Claude Code, I want you to onboard me into LimaCharlie. And that sounds super wide, but it's actually, not that wide. Like obviously, like LimaCharlie, in through the open source, we kind of injected some thought into that, where we described, look, LimaCharlie is a security platform. So like onboarding really means discovering as a customer what platforms do you have in your environment, do you use, and based on those, okay, what makes sense from a security perspective to have? Well, your Okta logs, like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. This particular internal production web app that you have, maybe it's not as important. For the AI to go through all of this, discover all of these, then to you as an operator, to the human, to go and say like, hey, here's everything that I've seen in your environment. You've got like 5,000 Windows machines in this type of environment. You've got 100 machines in Azure. Here's all of the logs, like everything. Like, are you cool with me just onboarding all of this into your tenant in LimaCharlie? And then clicking yes, and then it happens, right? Like that's pretty magical, because we talk to a lot of service providers, and it's like, it would take, I don't know, like 2 days for a senior analyst to go through these processes and do all of that. So that's great. But then we can also get into well, what if React to Shell came out right during the holidays? I'm waking up one morning and I have no idea what React to Shell is, or what it does, or what I should be looking for. So I can ask the AI and say like, hey, do a bunch of research on this, find out, what the IOCs are that are, related to this, or the techniques. And then for all of this, if they're IOCs, go and check them out against all of my tenants. If there are behaviors, well, it's a bit more complicated. So like generate detection rules for these, do retroactive queries, make sure that the rules don't hit all super often, like evaluate how many false positive we would have, like do that tuning in general. And then from all this, bring it all back. Tell me, do I have any customers that are affected right now? And stage this for me to go and, with my approval, go and deploy all of this on all of my tenants, so that I now start detecting it. That isn't one use case, right? Like it isn't one flow. It's like doing some research, having some, awareness of how cybersecurity works. It's being able to understand how to look at historical data. It's being able to understand how to deploy or engineer new detection rules. It's understanding about what it's like to run a SOC. One can make a rule that fires 5,000 times a day. Like that's useless, right? Especially at scale. So it's it's a lot of different things. And that's where this kind of operator and outcome mentality really comes in. It's to unlock those types of use cases. And you've got this across the board. Like that's kind of the beauty of saying, LimaCharlie as a whole is accessible to AI operators. I can even go and say, you know what? I'm curious today. How much is my spend on data sources across my 5,000 customers? I would like you to, create an Excel spreadsheet on this, do some like analysis on that, find me the outliers, generate me a report and the Excel spreadsheet, display that to me in, graphs that show, this bit related to this bit for all of my customers. That report doesn't exist anywhere on earth. It's got nothing to do with alert triage. It's got nothing to do with anything else. But because as an operator, it has access to the platform, it's able to go in and figure out how to go and achieve all of this.
Yeah. I mean, it's super impressive too. And it honestly, it gives you a bit of space to start thinking about the business of security operations as opposed to the reactive nature of it as well. Because all of those the kind of workflows you described are typically multiple people, several teams, often lots of back and forth with customers. Not an easy thing to pull together many spreadsheets to come up with maybe a right answer. And then, by the way, you need to write it up for your executive suite as well, and customers to share, every hour, especially if it's a big event. So I think that's a pretty big unlock too. And I think, circling back a bit to some of the kind of native like AI SOC players, like, do you see this as something like a gap that they can, or chasm they can cross in this capacity, or are we really talking apples and oranges in terms of like, the services providers and customers who aren't those?
I mean, look, nothing's impossible. But in the same way, my go-to comparison back in the day was, around hyperscalers was, look, IBM could have been AWS. There's no technical reason they couldn't, except that it's a really, really big ship to turn, right? So I think that applies for the large players. The large players don't really have much of an incentive at the moment to go and do that, because that means, candidly, like LimaCharlie does not charge for AI. Like it's this fuzzy just nature of the platform and how we put out there. So I think the big players have very little incentive to do that. The small new AI SOC players makes it really difficult for them to do that as well, for kind of the same reason. The other part of this is it's just a lot of it's a technical challenge as well, right? Because what we found while doing this is it would be a lie to say that Claude, for example, Claude Code can operate as an expert on LimaCharlie from day one. That's just not true. There's a lot of things that are that need to be that the AI that need to be taught to the AI. Not in terms of like training, but in terms of like English explanation of like, hey, this is how this part of the platform interprets this thing, right? And so for a smaller player, that is a lot of it's a lot of glue that needs to be put in there. So it's going to be very, very challenging. And that partially explains the use case based approach, right? Like we're going to attack that one use case and like make that happen well across 50 different SIMs, right? Cool. And that's where I think the advantage of a hyperscaler in our case really comes through, is we are able to put this, in open source, right? Like this is not a product. We're not, in a weird way, like we're not selling it, which is very funny, but we are just driving pure value to users. And I would say almost more importantly, we make it really, really easy for those users to go and extend it if they want, right? There's not a single line of code in this hard coding that a billing report needs to do blah, blah, blah. It's all English. And so it is an absolute certainty that, we have service providers that use LimaCharlie. And you know what? They don't like the way that we think about hunting retroactively for an IOC, and so they forked repo, or they just write their small English document in Markdown that kind of describes a little bit. Actually, we want you to favor this when you look at this part of the data looking historically, and that's fine. They didn't have to wait for a vendor. They didn't have to get a developer to go and do this. They, just had to have somebody on their side to go and say, like, we've been using it. We want to, do things this way instead. And they were able to go and build their product, which is their service, so that they can keep differentiating, themselves in the market, right? I think that is an incredible engine for differentiation for those service providers, because it gives them that ability to create and do things differently without having the development team.
Yeah. Oh, it's really that like kind of extensibility that, there's so many options in it. It's funny to think about it too, because, I think when an AI was first coming out, a lot of people thought like, oh, great, it's going to do all the boring stuff and humans get to be creative. And then I think over time, people realize that humans aren't actually that creative without some buffers and some guardrails or some like at least direction. Um, so thinking about that, like as far as we've come, like where do you still see the gaps? Like where do you still see there's like things to color in?
That's a great question. It's AI is moving so fast, right? That's part of it. So I think kind of touching on like a thing that you mentioned, I think there is not everybody has kind of like that imagination part, right? But there's a good percentage that, let's say, to pick a number, 20% in cybersecurity does have that drive. The challenge historically is that you would have to also ask, well, is that 120% also good software engineering, right? To go and build the automation and have the time to spend in doing all of that. And now you've lowered that bar. Now you can really truly say, this person has a great idea. They went for it. They did it. Because Claude Code can even code for you, right? I mean, that's kind of the very first use case that they had. So we are seeing people that even use it in LimaCharlie to go and say, hey, Claude Code, build a Python playbook for me to go and do this and automate, like to do all of that. So I think going forward, almost more important than what exactly is going to get better is making sure that we can capture that value as it happens, right? So that for me, that's kind of philosophy number one. Is the day that Opus 5 comes out, we need to be able to go and immediately turn it on and just keep moving. If we have to say, well, let me take a few weeks and do some evaluation or refactoring the code and all of that, like that's going to be really problematic as things keep going faster. Now, concretely, where things are going to get better, in my opinion, there's probably two aspects. One is around the orchestration of things. So I think that the AI today, we are seeing some traction around things like sub-agents, things like that. It's going to get a lot better so that the size of the outcomes that we're looking at, that the AI can handle, will just keep getting bigger and bigger. That will also enable much better ongoing processing by AI, right? So lots of use cases around that, like around long investigations, all of that. The other big change is going to be around the economics as well. So that's kind of the boring parts of this, but I think the economics are going to be such that the cost of models is going to be going down, and that's going to mean that the access to this or like the equation that you make around, where's human versus, human assisted, it's going to keep going on the side of like human assisted is definitely the best way to go and do this. So I think those are like going to be the really like the big differentiations and the big movements in the future.
And that makes sense too. And it reminds me of Jevons like paradox, where it's like, making something more efficient should decrease the need for it, but actually greatly increases the demand for it, like far outpaces it. I think you've seen a really great example of that with just AI usage in general. And so like once that kind of operator mind's like unlocked about what's possible, I don't think there's ever any going back.
That's right. And that even with within specialized domains, right? I think maybe that's kind of one thing I didn't really touch on, but cybersecurity is a somewhat specialized, like it's a specialized domain. I say somewhat because it's vaguely adjacent to software engineering. But the models are just getting better in general. We've even seen internally some shocking ability to do reverse engineering adjacent like tasks from the base coding models. So their reasoning capabilities are really, really good. And so I think that's going to keep getting better as well. And look, if there's one lesson that we've learned from the software engineering side of this, and I keep going back to it because when you look at AI and you look at adoption, by far, right, the tip of the spear is software engineering. And the lesson there is, if you think today, like, hey, this use case or that use case not going, like it's not doing as well as I liked it, or like 6 months ago, I tried to make it do X, you're going to be lagging behind, and it's just moving so fast and the capabilities are so incredibly undeniable. In software engineering, we started the year with like, hey, this is pretty impressive. It's probably going to go somewhere. And if you look at, what folks in software engineering are talking about today, it's beyond undeniable that, this is going to be a fundamental shift in how we do things. So all of those things together mean this is a really critical place.
Yeah, I think I saw Linus Torvalds over the weekend talking about using AI to develop features. Like if that is not a signal, like that's I don't know what is. But
that's right.
So it's like, so building on that, like, so, obviously we've come a long ways and we kind of understand what the gaps are, but like, so based on that, what do you think success looks like for like LimaCharlie, 12, 16 months out from now?
So here's my prediction. We were already, so LimaCharlie, right? Again, hyperscaler, we were working with a lot of service providers that were on the mature side of things, right? People that know very well how to do cybersecurity, had some software engineering chops. They were able to leverage the value of LimaCharlie, meaning, scale up much more easily, get much better margins for what they're doing, automate a lot, produce products that are very differentiated, all that stuff. With this move of bringing AI as a on par operator in LimaCharlie, I think this bar goes way down. Meaning, look, it's still, I think it still requires a service provider or an enterprise, candidly, that, wants to do better and wants to automate things. And, it's kind of like looking at that, the product from that perspective, because there are a lot of service providers that do look at it from the, hey, I resell the CrowdStrike SKU and like, I'm fine, right? Like it's a convenience thing. And like, yeah, that's great. You and 20,000 other people resell the exact same thing. If you're fine with that, that's cool. But I think now we're going to see a lot of those service providers that want to do better, want to differentiate, that have a lot of great people with the cybersecurity mindset and the ideas to start to be able to leverage that and leverage LimaCharlie without having kind of like the deeper software engineering chops, but get that value. I think the other thing we're going to see is we're going to see folks building the next generation of SOCs on top of LimaCharlie, because it provides these superpowers to people, and it has this ability to be leveraged through AI. It means that it's by far the best platform for somebody that has strong opinions about, very powerful things that can be built with AI or that leverage AI, to go and achieve these things, right? It's the old hyperscaler thing, right? And if you start a tech company today, you don't rack and stack your hardware on day one, right? You go to AWS. So I think there's still a lot of that direction happening, and so I expect to see people building things that like we never even thought about being possible on top of LimaCharlie.
Well, I can see a future where bring your own SOC becomes a new acronym. You can like build from that standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, look, cybersecurity is a funny industry sometimes, right? We are dealing with technology day in, day out. We deal with attackers that rethink how they're doing attacks, all the time. I remember the beginning of ransomware. Like I remember having the thought process of like, they did what? And like, oh yeah, you don't have to just steal information. It's a whole new way of doing crime. Yet, as an industry, right? It feels like we're not really actually that. We're pretty risk averse. We're still thinking in terms of like the same old like bundler, ways. Like look at McAfee and look at CrowdStrike, and like things haven't really changed all that much in many ways. So I think AI, I'm hoping kind of like brings a little bit more of that spark of people rethinking, like you say, like bring in your own SOC. Is there a world where people own their infrastructure and are able to assemble a SOC, like dynamically, from different experts in the industry? I don't mean like assemble as in like synthetic analysts. I mean, literally bring in this reverse engineer so that they can, connect into your own infrastructure. You provide, narrow access, and they can leverage AI to go and build some capability for you and then go away, right? Like so many different models that are fascinating to think about.
Yeah, definitely. It's probably the most exciting time in the cyber industry since I got into it, 20 plus years ago. Just like what's possible at this point. And thinking of that, kind of as we come to the close of this, like for the security practitioners watching this, like, do you have any advice or final words for them to carry on in this new world?
Yeah. Yes. From what I've learned on the software engineering side of things, right? Like, because again, they're at the tip of the spear. I believe quite strongly that it's the same pattern is going to be happening in cybersecurity. And what we're seeing is it's not a question of you learning a narrow specific new tool, or like, having this one idea of how to do things in AI. The fundamental truth, if you ask all of these software engineers, right, like how did they get to do like the best decisions, like how they have to think about differently, it's the thinking about differently, it's the experience of it. Meaning you have to go and, day one, maybe do something that's really simple, and that's fine. And then day two, something a little bit more complex, and maybe it's not going to work. And you're going to look at it, and then you're going to understand, have that kind of like slight mentality shift of like, oh, this is why it didn't work. And it's these dominoes, right, in front of each other that end up to lead you to those really major shifts in how you do things. So, don't try it for 5 minutes and go like, this is, I don't like this, right? It's a thing you have to exercise, do it, and then you start to really see where the value is. And that's when those really great outcomes come out of that. So I think it's super critical for people to go and make the first steps. Just make the first steps, and you will see that, it's just going to keep accelerating. And once you've had that realization, going back is not really an option.
Makes sense too. And speaking of making the first steps too, I think you guys have a community version, right? That people can jump on.
That's exactly right. Right. So like putting all the things we kind of talked about. Yes. We have a community edition. So you can get 2 tenants for free and 2 EDRs per tenant. and external telemetry flowing in as well. The AI part of all of this, like we don't charge for that. We see as kind of just a core nature of our platform. So, you do bring your own license kind of thing, or, you use Claude Code locally or Codex or whatever you want to use. And we have a public repo for this where you can see kind of all of this training, like how we talk to the LLMs and explain our platform that you can still leverage as skills. And so putting all these things together mean, hey, install it at home and play with it in your own lab, or, at work with the first customer or anything like that. If you have a credit card, you can also just go and never talk to anybody on the LimaCharlie side if you want, and just, go and build things. But obviously we're always there to like answer questions, but all this to say, I think we've broken every barrier, that is there to prevent somebody in cybersecurity from actually going, trying and doing it and discovering all of this.
Amazing. I think it's a super exciting time to be in this space too. And Max, thanks so much for your time. This has been really great. I really appreciate learning all about this new kind of paradigm shift you've been working on. And I think there's no going back to this.
My pleasure. It was a great chat.
Likewise. And so now we're going to transition to our next part. It's actually a panel discussion. Speaking of no going back, the title is No Going Back, AI Redefines SecOps for Security and Service Providers.
Welcome, everyone, to our panel, No Going Back, AI Redefines SecOps for Security Service Providers. My name's Chris Luft. I'm co-founder and CCO of LimaCharlie, and I'm thrilled to be hosting this discussion with an incredible group of practitioners and leaders who live at the intersection of security operations and cutting-edge technology. Before we begin, I want to quickly introduce our panel. First, we have Eric Capuano, co-founder of the Digital Defense Institute and seasoned cybersecurity practitioner focused on incident response, threat hunting, and security operations. Eric brings decades of real-world experience training defenders and building resilient security programs. Next up, Maxime Lamoth-Broussard, founder and CEO of LimaCharlie, a platform architected from day one for API-first automation and now driving the next era of AI-driven security operations. Followed by Josh Neal, co-founder and CTO of Alpha Level, where he leads innovation and precision threat detection using machine learning and modern detection. We're also joined by Chris Merritt, the founder of CrowdStrike Overwatch and former AF CERT leader, currently serving as an advisor to early-stage companies and bringing strategic insight to product and marketing decisions. And last but not least, Daniel Lees, senior staff cloud security architect at Google and advisor to several early-stage technology companies. Thank you all so much for being with us today. I'm excited about this conversation where we're going to explore how AI is reshaping SecOps from automation to the economics of running security at scale. Let's get started. AI is everywhere in security right now. Most vendors talk about AI assistance, but not many talk about AI operating full security workflows. I want each of you to think of a specific security workflow that was manual drudgery like 18 months ago, which isn't anymore. What is it, and what does AI do with it today? Eric, let's start with you.
Yeah, so it's kind of fascinating. I think AI means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And it's definitely no clearer even in our narrow echo chamber of security, right? Because there's so many hot takes on it. There's a lot of skepticism around it. And there's definitely a lot of vendor fluff and smoke and mirrors, sadly. But I will say that it's also becoming, I think, undeniable the way that it's reshaping our workflows, the way that it's pushing our efficiency and our effectiveness. I mean, anyone that's not able to see kind of the inevitability that this is going to change the way we do security operations, threat hunting, incident response. I mean, it's here, right? It's here. And so as a practitioner, but also as an entrepreneur, I get to appreciate it from both aspects. As an entrepreneur, one of my favorite aspects of this is the efficiency gains, right? Because efficiency converts into profit margin, right? There's several different workflows that have just been revolutionized for me personally, but I'll give two that are they're force multipliers. So one of the most tedious things in security operations is detection engineering, right? Because it's very manual, very labor intensive. You're doing a lot of research, you're doing a lot of testing, because you can't just send a new detection into a production pipeline without worrying about what the downstream consequences might be. And so that process would take a human or a human team, could be many hours, in most cases days, in order to get a rule from concept to production. Well, it turns out that whole workflow is actually very well understood. It's just slow and labor intensive. So as you start to leverage the concepts of LLM, but also the concepts of machine learning, right? You can, these two things I don't think are mutually exclusive. You can shim one with the other to say, okay, I've got this generally trained model that's not going to be phenomenal at crafting detections, but it turns out if I shim it not only with reference data, examples, and so on and so forth, but then also provide it tools to be able to test its theories and assumptions, right? And then have it go into an iteration loop. You're not done until all of these conditions are met. Suddenly, the thing that took the human 16 hours takes the coding agent 6 minutes. And now you're producing detection content at speed that was never thought to be possible without the consequences of, oh no, hundreds of untested rules just went into the pipeline, right? So that was one really exciting workflow that has revolutionized, completely unrecognizable to me now. But another one, and this is a bit more generic, but a bit more wide reaching, but full end-to-end investigative workflows. And using the same concepts I just described, right? Again, I'm not going to set loose a generally trained model on a very complex, very nuanced investigation into a BEC attack or something. However, shimmed with, dozens of other investigations, some that went really well, some that did not go so well, and then having the model sort of iterate to kind of understand which patterns were more effective, which queries were more effective, right? And then watching it basically get better results in much shorter period of time every time you run it has been a game changer for me, because even though I'm a fairly seasoned threat hunter, incident responder, and security operations practitioner, I can't move that fast, right? I just simply can't, but I can provide feedback to this agent team as it's working. And that to me is worth its weight in gold, to sit there and just train. Because every investigation I run now, I need to provide fewer inputs because of the past inputs it's already accounted for. And so those are two workflows that are a daily impact for me, that are, again, 5 years ago would have been nearly impossible to achieve.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Josh, I know you guys have been working with it quite a bit. What kind of things have you seen it able to do that it wasn't able to do 18 months ago?
I think I'm going to be a little contrarian. I've been doing sort of machine learning based threat detection for 25 years. To me, this is a pretty significant iteration on that. But I kind of want to back up a little bit and talk, like Eric sort of mentioned, how do we define AI? And like Carl Sagan said, in order to bake an apple pie, you have to first invent the universe. I won't invent the universe, but I will say that I haven't seen a definition of AI such that an LLM qualifies, and yet supervised machine learning or other methods do not. So I want to include non-LLM based things in my definition, at least for the purposes of this discussion. And I really don't want to have a big argument about that. I just want to use it as a way to talk a little bit further. And then the next thing I want to say is, we've had agentic systems, if you will, in security, taking automatic steps, full life cycle steps since at least 2017. And I'm going to give you an example. In Defender, somewhere around 2017, I might be a little bit off on my timing, they started deploying deep learning models for the detection of malware. Then there is a decision step, so that the deep learning model will not only detect, but also quantify the confidence that the algorithm has in that detection. So there's a number, 75%, 92%. Then there's a decision-making algorithm that says at this level, What do we do next? And then that is sent to remediation actions like shutting down processes, disabling accounts, etc. If you're willing to go along with all the things I just said, then I would say that that's an agentic system that's been taking active remediations, full flow from initial sensing of the binary all the way through remediation since about 2017. In Alpha Levels work, we are not going that end-to-end flow yet with fully automated systems. We are getting rid of a ton of noise for our human analysts so they can make more efficient decisions, but we're not yet trusting, I guess I'll say that the precision and recall of threat detection itself is several orders of magnitude worse than it needs to be in order to take active remediation steps without pissing off everybody in the enterprise. And the minute, your algorithm shuts down the CEO's account, your AI is done. Okay. You're not doing it anymore. So I think we need to be improving the precision, mostly precision, false positives, by several orders of magnitude before we start taking these end-to-end remediation steps. There's my more than 2 cents, perhaps.
Max, I want to go to you next because I know you have a slightly different take as far as assistive AI and how it's becoming operational AI. I know the detection space is its own sort of special animal, but we're talking more about operationalizing AI.
Yeah, honestly, I think it kind of dovetails great from what Joshua was talking about, right? There is certainly the distinction between I'm gonna I'm gonna call it I think we need words, right, to associate words with these different things, and that's part of the challenge. So let's call LLM the LLM stuff, and then AI the old only for this part maybe. But the idea, the way I think about this is that I think the AI part of this, I think of like the assembly line, right? You're able to, with a lot of crafting, put a very specific pipeline together that achieves magic. And I think we've achieved that for a while. For me as a consumer, I'd put it, I remember the moment where like I hit that was with, I think it was like Google Photos that started tagging, labeling the pictures you had in there. And all of a sudden you could say, like, I'm looking for a gray cat and, find it in the pictures. And like, that's a very narrow pipeline. And I think that is how you get production, stuff going through. However, the way I think about the LLMs is obviously different because I think you're totally right on the recall precision not being there for having that same kind of pipeline, hardcore on all detections, for example, coming in. However, I think about this a little bit like the same distinction between cryptography and security. I think it's easy sometimes for people that get into security at the beginning to like see cryptography as like almost weirdly equivalent to security. And it's like, well, it's encrypted, so it's safe. It's like, no, one is very narrow, very machine efficient, extremely critical. But the reality is that there's a ton of gray area around this that is kind of equally important. And so the LLMs, in my mind, and the operationalization comes there first, where the precision, the recall, the fuzzy lines become a lot more acceptable, right? So when I think of like the first things, the first places where we bring in the LLMs to operationalize things, it's things like configuration and onboarding and research. And then, I think we're kind of building up that stack a little bit. Like I like the way that Eric was putting it, because that's also how I think about it. We're building up that training corpus for the LLMs of English. The models are getting better at the same time. And so I think we're making our way to a place where, we can have such, high precision, high recall that we can really use it as a workhorse for reliable, do this thing all the time. But I think it's going to be the last part. And, it's a lot less sexy to be talking about like, hey, I want to onboard this weird data source from this one vendor. But it's also a huge part of what the reality is of like security teams today in a SOC, for example. So I think that's kind of where those two things get bridged together.
Daniel, I'm curious to hear your take, the kind of scale and breadth that you look at things with eyes at Google. How does this land with you?
It lands in like an in between for me because I may look younger, but I'm a graybeard. So I agree with Joshua. Like a lot of there's been traditional ML before that did behavioral analytics and things like that. But what we're seeing with the LLMs coming in is the ability to use correlation on a vast scale, much greater, because then it ties reasoning into the graph of your infrastructure. So it used to be you can see an event in this one particular log, it might link to two other logs, and then you need a really highly skilled person to come in and then build the rest of the correlation, how it links out to other data points. So you can find where the original user was and how that tied to, a permission 5 systems away. And that's where we're seeing the LLMs to be able to do a level of reasoning to make those connections for you. So rather than searching for the needle in the haystack, the needle's starting to kind of bubble up to the top of the haystack. And the LLMs are making that happen a lot quicker. So as the confidence builds them and their reasoning capabilities improve and the ability to ground it on good behavior from previous examples and things like that, you'll see that shrink the amount of time and that like the amount of noise toil that you have to go through in order to find those and then get that story that can craft it out for you. So that person have to spend 3 hours saying, well, they logged in here and then I found it twittered this and it tinked to that. Like the LM will be like, this is the path that went all the way through. So you can see from the start to the finish where that event occurred and why that occurred in an explainable story.
And I'm sure, and maybe I'm making some assumptions, but I'm sure Google does tons of benchmarking and stuff like that. Is this an exponential curve we're seeing, the improvement in efficiency and performance?
Yeah, we are ourselves internally on it because of that, being able to tame that noise. Like the volume of data that we get is huge. So anything that can start to get better correlation points and the association between those correlation points, it gives us, a logarithmic scale that's going up on, or exponential scale that is going up on, that we can improve on that. So.
Awesome. Chris, you've been very quiet, and I know you work with a lot of early stage companies. I'm really curious to hear what you're sort of seeing on the ground and what your take on this is.
I like what everyone's saying so far. Joshua, you kind of captured my heart when it comes to we've been using the word AI and security for a long time since we've deployed any sort of data science in production, right? Machine learning algorithms. We used to call that AI. But it was a little before its time. People didn't buy it. Now we have LLMs and everyone's like, holy crap. So Max, I agree with you. I think we should talk about LLMs and then, everything, almost anything data science, I think we call AI. A comment about LLMs, and then I want to answer your direct question about the specific workflow that I think has been the most useful from what I've seen. I think maybe Eric, you brought it up, but just like LLMs are trained. They're generalists, right? They're really, really good generalists. Like they're very, very broad, pretty deep. Until we actually train a threat hunting model, we're just using like we'll call it a native English speaker and trying to like cram in some structure around them to have them do a thing for us. I fundamentally view LLMs as like the great technology innovation that they're bringing to us is ability to reason at scale, like expertise level of reasoning. I don't view them as workflow masters. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I'll probably get on a soapbox at some point over this time here about that. But okay, so which workflow I think has been the most useful? Out of the box, I think just being able to upload a PDF, an intelligence report, and having it summarize and pull out IOCs. I don't love IOCs, but having it pull out IOCs and then maybe doing something with it, running like a query against your SIEM or something, that's pretty useful, I think. You're having people who feel like they're hunting and doing some high-end stuff, and we know how easily that breaks and how unscalable that probably actually is. But I would say that's probably the number one use case here people talk about where where they might get past that inflection point of what is AI to, ooh, I think I could actually use this.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so one of the big distinctions I hear a lot is this idea about AI as an operator versus AI as an assistant. How is this changing the way we all need to start thinking about security operations? Max, I know we've talked about this a lot. Can you maybe help us frame this?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's I think there's going to be a lot of this where it's kind of a summary of the previous thing that we talked about, kind of put together, right? But I think the big distinction that we're seeing is between those two things is the evolution of LLMs in the past 2 years. We started with ChatGPT, right? Like super quick summary, right? We started with ChatGPT, and then, well, don't nitpick this. I am sure there were various versions that existed before. I mean, at the consumer level, like at the chat level, and fundamentally those models are text in, text out, right? English. And so we started by just being able to interrogate that model. And over time, slowly, we added this concept of tools. And then, as we refined this, we eventually got to the concept of MCP, where we started to, again, expand a little bit the horizon of the tools that were possible to use. And there's a race between two things that happened in there, which is the race between the tooling itself. So this concept of tool calls, and a race between the quality of reasoning of the models. And we hit the tool calls before we hit the sweet spot for the reasoning. So as this was happening, it meant that our model was able to call a tool that is get alert, right? Like the very simple tools, it's an API and go and get this and kind of like summarize this. Perfect use case. So that's the assistant level, right? Get me a little bit of data, dump it into context, and then summarize it or tell me a little bit about it. What happened is, in my mind, I would say in the last 6 months, I mean, maybe you could expand it to maybe a year, is the models have gotten so good that they've caught up with the ability to do tool calls. And now, if you try to put yourself in the middle of that loop, if you try to, to inject yourself in the middle of that loop to say, these are the tools that you should call in this order to accomplish this thing, you're losing 50% of the value of the new models, because the new models are able to get you to the outcome, right? So you're able to describe an outcome. You're able to describe a set of tools. We've moved past MCP, which I'm sure is a topic where we might touch at some point on, but like moving past MCP, and we get to this point where now it's really able to reason first about the tools that it needs and to maintain that thread over a long period of time and do the type of investigation that Eric was talking about. And so that's the operator level, right? We're no longer just saying like, hey, get this piece of data and summarize it and then tell it to me, which is fine, but now we're actually able to say, you are an operator of this machinery. This is the outcome that I'm looking for. Here's a corpus of training data, right? English training to help you along, but figure out your path through this. So I think to me that's the distinction here.
Josh, I'm interested to ask you. I know, let's make the distinction between ML and LLMs, and I know the core of your work's very deterministic and built on MLs. Have you been using LLMs from recommending things to doing things in any of the work you're doing at alpha level?
No, honestly, we view LLMs as the natural language part of a flow. I think, like Chris said, decision making or orchestration of workflows, we use other methods, graph methods, and decision science methods. So the way I look at large language models in particular is tasks that involve natural language processing. There are a lot of those, from summarization. That's a pretty obvious one, is just produce a natural language report or a chat interface or something like that. But there's more subtle things that are having massive impact for us, like normalization of data without having to build a bunch of regex and maintain a bunch of regex. That's a fundamental game changer for not wasting time in developing new methods and so forth. I could go on the applications of using large language models in a workflow, but where I am stopping is kind of where Chris is stopping, in that we don't use it to orchestrate or decide on where to send, the inference down a pipeline of algorithms. Yeah, I feel like I've always been a sort of right tool for the job, and the tools here are very deep and very broad. There's 200 years of statistics and machine learning research to draw from. So I think I would offer caution in assuming that large language models are the only and best way to do this. I have alternatives that I can suggest. Graph methods for correlation are a core research for me, and I've been publishing a long time. They're really good, and they're really cheap, and they are understandable from a development perspective and controllable and things. So there's a lot of, I think I'm offering to this group and the larger audience, don't throw out all the other stuff we know how to do, and have very sophisticated decision making, and try a lot of things and measure what's working well, both from a algorithmic performance perspective at scale with lots of examples, but also cost. And, we haven't talked a lot about cost, but a lot of times I'm seeing vendors come with LLM solutions that are far more expensive than something we could do more simply. So,
yeah, and that's interesting, because I think that comes down to, the narrow versus broad approach to a problem. If we can really narrow the problem down, we can build a tailored solution that can solve it efficiently and at scale. And I think one of the things that the LLMs bring is, maybe not a deterministic outcome, but like a broad set of capabilities that bring efficiency operationally. Eric, you work with a lot of junior analysts. Are you seeing this improvement in operational efficiency inside the organization?
Okay, so yes. However, so Joshua there is sharing some really phenomenal insights, and it actually there's a direct correlation between sort of the message behind kind of what he's saying to what I'm observing with the impact that AI is having on sort of junior level, entry level, up and coming sort of practitioners. And I want to extrapolate a little bit of what I gathered from Joshua and his really brilliant insights into kind of, the tendency for the mass wave of AI LLM adoption is to kind of completely throw out the long history of traditional machine learning. And it dawned on me, the humble side of me said, man, he's 100% right. It's like a bunch of folks that just learned how to swing a sledgehammer, but never thought maybe I should first practice with the precision tools. But that is the exact same risk I see, Chris, introducing these types of systems into junior workforce. Because, you put these tools in untrained hands, where's the feedback loop now? Garbage in, garbage out, right? And who's supervising the model that's still learning when the person using the model is also still learning, right? And so I think it can be a huge plus, but there are caveats. And again, there's a lot of parallels to what Joshua just said, right? An LLM is not the end-all be-all solution to all of these problems. And so the caveat, I think, to AI effectively augmenting junior workforce is there's some major assumptions there that the model, the workflows, the checkpoints, the hooks, the tools, all that stuff has to be expertly designed, right? And continually tuned and tweaked and maintained by folks that really do know what's going on and really do know how these things work. before you just set it loose on junior people and think that good things are going to come out of it, because actually, to the contrary, very, very bad things can come out of it, right? So I hate to give such a opaque answer, but I think it's very true that it can be equal parts good as it can be bad, and there's a lot of determining factors that go into that.
With great power comes great responsibility.
I say that like 3 times a week, Chris. Yes, yes.
Yeah, my mental model. Oh, go for it, Dan.
I was gonna say that whole it reminds me of that incident that was when vibe coding was starting to be the soup du jour, right? And then one guy's going on Twitter, it's like, I just vibe coded my whole app. It's got the database and everything, and it's up and running. Programmers are over, blah blah blah. And then the next post was like, why are you all attacking my database? And then everyone was like, okay, my database is down. I learned my lesson. It's not just. So it's like the tool needs to get a little further along in there.
Exactly. For me, my mental model here is it's nothing new, right? But it's if what I need is to produce bicycles, and I need to produce 100 bicycles a day, I'm going to spend a year building my assembly chain, tweak all the pieces in my assembly chain so I can start producing those bicycles. To me, that's ML. That's like, when you say like we have like 100 years of like thinking about this, and yes, I think we can sit down and spend, 6 months a year to build an extremely efficient, extremely powerful like pipeline for this. And then the way I see the LLMs in this is like, if my bike breaks, I don't want to go to a factory and try to get them to build an assembly line for me. I just kind of want like the dude across the street who's got a bunch of tools in his toolbox. And yeah, every now and then he's going to strip a nut and like, that's fine. You know what I mean? Like it's going to be good enough. So I think that's when I think like alert triage, high flow, high repeatability, like I want ML all the way. Summarizing stuff to your point, like, yeah, that's a little bit more loosey-goosey.
I agree a lot with Max, and also still with Joshua, because the way I kind of see, Max, your analogy, because I'm also a big believer in this as well for the same reason. But where I think that Joshua's concepts, and I'm really taking a lot away from you, Joshua, I appreciate your insights, is that like, well, yeah, I don't want a whole factory line just for assembling bicycles. But there's a couple of parts on that bicycle that are never changing, that are critical, that are very important. So maybe the chain. Okay, I'll let the chain. I'll have a chain producing factory, but all the other parts of my bicycle are changing all the time as I upgrade and downgrade, and this new handlebars comes out, these new tires come out. I want some of those things to be less fixed and to have more flexibility. But maybe there's a few components that I do not want that non-deterministic aspect to. And so, but yeah, I'm just agreeing with both of you on that.
Yeah, and I think I'm agreeing with Max too. We're not actually disagreeing. I like the analogy of the bike. And okay, I've got a production line that builds bikes, and that better be efficient and effective and make good bikes. Then you got the user who wants to modify their bike, and they need the democratization of the factory, if you will. They're not a bike expert, and they don't know the gear ratios and all of that. So they want to call somebody and say, hey man, I just want to move faster because I'm too slow. I want my gears bigger. I don't know. I'm not really a bike guy, but you know what I mean? So and a large language model democratizes, access to compute. It's actually what computer scientists have been doing since the beginning of time, is make it easier to use hardware and data to do stuff, make a new bike or things. So I think that LLMs are democratizing access to security knowledge and findings. One of the challenges is it's also democratizing attacks. So maybe that's a different topic, but yeah.
I don't think it's a different topic.
In rounding out this, there was a piece where we had assistant versus operator, and like for our side, the assistant is like that's like the chatbot or the little summary tile on the side, and we see operator as when you're giving that robot agency. And so I get flack from the MCP guys, but I always make the API guys laugh because I'm like, oh, MCP is lazy APIs, right? It's, no longer really need to fully learn all the semantics and write it the right way. And so what I see coming out of some of the LLM side as it attaches to all these different tools, which may be a more specific ML, it might be something else, is it starts to be able to, you can feed it the data of behaviors, or you can also train it on the data of those behaviors. And then you can give it the agency when it sees certain things that way you don't need to be as bespoke about how you're developing your system that interfaces with those different pieces. And it can kind of figure out a little bit. It may not always be right. And that's why it still needs to be monitored, but it simplifies that, being able to interconnect those different systems and then have a behavior activate on it.
I'd like to just build on that just slightly, because the way I see it is, we all, when the LLM, boom happened, it was an assistant. It was an assistant before it was anything else, really, at least to consumers, to the masses. And then when the agentic sort of capabilities started to emerge, what very quickly became evident to me, at least, is that this is one of those scenarios where the sum is greater than the parts, because, the assistant assumes that it's a two-party conversation. It's the user and the assistant. Well, what if the user doesn't really know how to have this conversation, right? What if the user is injecting too much bias into the conversation? The effectiveness of the assistant becomes kind of variable, right? And so what I find is, at least in my experience, is when I couple the assistant aspect of the LLM with the agentic, operator capabilities, suddenly removing myself sometimes from that loop makes it more effective on both sides. Right? Because I'm not injecting my wetware, nonsense, it's just, and of course, it's not always going to emerge with perfect results, but it's actually quite impressive whenever it's speaking with itself effectively in different capacities.
If you have good success criteria, you can build a loop where it might make a bunch of mistakes along the way, but it's going to eventually get to the right answer. Chris, you've been quiet again. I know as someone who's advising security companies on strategy, how do you see this?
So like the operator term, I think I'm learning what we mean by it here. I think it's more like the end-to-end orchestrating or quarterbacking an entire end-to-end life cycle, I think is what I mean by it. I think LLM's great assistants, like that was the first use case of it, really. Right? It makes sense. I think there's utility to that. I think there's utility to it being an orchestrator of an entire end-to-end life cycle of a workflow or whatever. I honestly think the reason we're even having this panel is because we as an industry are terrible at understanding what it actually takes to analyze something. Like I think we spend close to zero time on analytical tradecraft, other than going to outsource training and then coming back and not knowing how to use it internally. Intelligence community has actually spent time studying this. There's papers out there about intelligence tradecraft. To me, it's the exact same analytical type of components or mechanics to it. And since we can't actually articulate it well as an industry, we never actually worked on it, we want to structure everything to be a deterministic problem. And so we take analysis of signals in the SOC and we try to structure it into workflows. And in my mind, as soon as you can structure the analysis, just automate it. So if you have humans looking at SOP to structure their work, in my mind, those humans are doing the wrong work, in my opinion. So I think LLMs today, as it sits, can be really, really good at scaling non-deterministic problem solving. And that's really hard for us to think about. Like, how do you control it? How do we know? How can you guarantee it's going to have the same answer? Like, well, we don't have that. We don't have that level of control or measure today. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And so and when Eric was talking, it made me think about this comment here. And that is like the user of an LLM is the LLM is only as useful as like that user plus one, right? So if you give it to a tier one analyst and the LLM does a thing for you and it looks like magic, and the tier one analyst is like, cool, I love it, go for it. But the tier two analysts, they're going to call it. They're going to call it BS. No, that was wrong. That's just absolutely fundamentally wrong. You know what I mean? So it's like it just goes to your level of knowledge until you can stop grading the output. So I still think it is an expertise machine. I think it can scale expertise, and it's ready to fool what level of expertise you're at, no matter where you're at. You know what I mean? So I think trying to like programmatically deploy LLMs into a SOC All it's doing is it's amplifying our problems today. I really don't think it's solving anything.
This is really interesting. I feel like I particularly like this concept of like you say, look, we do training on running analysis and like the tradecraft, but it's not. There's no formalization. I mean, security formalization is as old as security, but also very, very much in its infancy, right? I think there's a couple of standards, I would say, like Sigma is kind of like the first one that comes to mind, and Yara, where we're defining that, but nothing for tradecraft. There's MITRE at a high level, right? High level conceptual, but there's nothing. I feel like there's no artifact that people can point to that is the standard of tradecraft. At the same time, I'm like, maybe a hot take, but I'm wondering, are these LLMs coming into the SOC going to be the catalyst for us to create those? Because when I think about a lot of the stuff Eric is doing, right, it's putting together, I think about it as putting together a lot of tradecraft, and not all of it, but I suspect that a lot of it could be given to a human analyst for them to read and learn how to do better tradecraft. So like, I'm wondering if like we're going to weirdly skip a step into this by, yes, producing this tradecraft, but not directly for humans, initially for LLMs, but we might all benefit from that after. I don't know. It's
an interesting take. Like, I think that's where I want to be. Like, I want to believe that this could be a catalyst. I mean, any of these things could be a catalyst, right? But I think if you don't own your strategy for security operations, and you're continually looking to buy solutions, you're continually looking to outsource part of the problem solving, then I don't see where there'd be a natural catalyst to cause you to do something differently, to actually like break apart how you do workflow, how do you build your team, how do you build an organization, how do you build your strategy, how do you build the metrics to grade whether you're being successful or not. And so like, I just don't, there's been so many inputs into our industry that could catalyze that level of thinking. I don't know if LLMs will be different. They're my cynical opinion.
I have a similar cynical opinion, but I'll say that there has been a catalyst for my profession, which is sort of data science applied to threat detection in particular. It's a very sort of narrow part of security. I've been fighting this, trust from the industry on inferential methods, things beyond a rule, for 20 years. When, in 2008 or something, I started trying to get people to buy into UEBA, what became UEBA, but we were doing in the government sort of as anomaly detection and other things. And, CISOs were very skeptical, and anything that wasn't a rule that they could read and understand was rejected. And I had a hard time. I didn't know my chosen profession, whether my chosen profession would actually get adopted by security before I was dead. What LLMs have done is open the aperture and appetite for inferential methods from data.
Yes.
Right. Whether they're an LLM or anything else, people are starting to say yes. And I think we have to, because I've been anticipating, I think all of us have been anticipating that attacks that go beyond initial penetration, script kiddie, get into one endpoint, that as soon as you go to lateral movement, the exploration to find the right data to steal or encrypt or whatever, a multi-hop attack, that to date, most of that has been done with human decision making and the attacker's side. And even different teams that are responsible for different parts of the attack itself, initial penetration followed by lateral. There are different teams that are deployed, but that's human speed attacks. I think all of us are anticipating that a lot of these attack behaviors can be encoded into models of some kind, and just autonomous decision making on the part of the attack code is coming. If we are using humans to interdict, we're lost. We've lost the game. They've already, in 3 milliseconds, encrypted the data for a ransomware attack. So we have to get there. And we have to deploy inferential methods in defense. And I'm just sort of grateful that the CISOs are starting to see that, machine learning is not only, well, it can be used here. It's necessary. We have to, or we're lost as an industry. So
can I disagree with Josh while agreeing with him, or disagree with him in order to agree with him? I think everything you just said, I agree with, but I think it leads to why you must have a human in the loop and why it scales. I think what LLMs are actually catalyzing is it's like I said before, it's scaling inefficiency. I think we want to do more of what we're doing, and I think what we're doing isn't working. And looking at LLMs, like this actually is technology we need as an industry because we need help thinking about the problem. We need to be solving better problems, not solving the same problem the same way, but in a scaled fashion. And as the adversaries, let's just presume the attacks are going to increase at a greater than human level, right? We'll just presume that. What does that mean for us? So I think the reaction is that we need to also deploy like a more technologically heavy solution. Yes, maybe, but I don't know why we can't have a world where we use LLMs. Let's say we break apart analytical tradecraft. This is how you analyze disparate pieces of data to come to a conclusion. Let a human actually be the one to make the decision. And then now you have this agentic analytical ecosystem looking at way more data, way more dynamic piece of data, just in time, dynamism. And then a human can actually scale because now whenever they make a decision, they're making a decision on 50% of everything that company sees. Versus today, you have 150 humans making a decision on a sliver of a fraction of something that actually doesn't really matter. So I really think we have the technology today with LLMs to help us think about the problem better. What I don't want to see happen in the industry is we scale what we have today. That is not the answer. It can't be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. I always think of the LLM as like my mech suit. I don't know if anybody here played Titanfall, but I just want to pivot over to like the LLM AI meets real world fuzziness. So for like service providers, MSSPs, and MDRs, which are running complex multi-tenant environments and have super thin margins. Eric, you train defenders and work with service providers constantly. Where are we seeing the biggest operational impact of adopting AI deeply, beyond alert triage? Are you seeing that impact operations?
Oh, without a doubt, every single day. And that's actually probably what I spend about 80% of my time focusing on right now, because I am of the belief that by codifying the knowledge of the best practitioners that you have on your team into these agentic workflows and capabilities, not only are there massive efficiency gains to be realized, but there's effectiveness gains to be realized. And what I mean by that is there's no team in the world that every single person on that team is the rock star, the one that always finds the bad guy, that never gets it wrong, that doesn't make false positive determinations. And, so teams are a spectrum, but that's the whole promise of saying, hey, let's compile all of our best thinking, right, into agent instructions and into, checkpoints, into QA review processes. Once and of course, this is a never ending sort of iteration, but like once you get to that point and you realize, crap, I think we've given it everything that we know. And then you realize as you send things through it now, it's damn near perfect every time it pops out on the other side. And now you realize that every triage, every investigation, even every IR workflow is always, without fail, accounting for all of the best practices. And this is not a new concept, right? This goes back to, the promise of SOAR was kind of the same thing, right? Is, hey, your analysts are already doing these manual workflows over and over and over again. Codify them, automate them. Okay, got it. But the SOAR the original SOAR did not have this, non-deterministic, pro and con, right? To say, well, hold on a minute, I'm not sure this is what it looks like, and let me look at it this way and that way. Some artificial reasoning, right? And so it's a game changer for a number of reasons, Chris. Not only the efficiency, but like I said, when done right, which to the point of everyone on this call is rare, okay? But when done right, the outcomes are game changing, right? The quality of investigative work, the depth of investigative work is mind boggling, and it's no longer subject to who was on the keyboard doing it, right? I don't have to worry, when the big incident comes in, but the junior analyst was the one that was on call, are they going to mess it up? It's like, no, because they're using the thing that was trained by all of us. So it's going to be at least as good as our combined best thinking, and not held to the level of the person at the keyboard who, like the rest of us, makes mistakes and is hard set at their training level, right? So, that's just one of many things that we've realized, Chris, in the efficiencies and capabilities that are here. But I do want to just couple one other thing that I don't think we've talked about enough here. We've talked about LLM, but I think there's a minor distinction to the LLM coding agent type of applications, because now it's not just generating language, but if I can generate code or even just simply interacting with command lines of, my operating system, the number of things that enables, that opens up is kind of cool, because to piggyback on the whole, attackers are getting faster. Yes. And case in point, on Christmas Eve, a security researcher at Elastic dropped a POC for MongoDB, an exploit POC that shook the world, right? Thank you. Merry Christmas, right? Now, I didn't see it until the 26th, but I saw it on Blue Sky and I was like, oh man, that sucks. Because, like everyone else, I enjoyed my Christmas day. But on the 26th, I looked at it and said, oh, that sucks. Well, let me go look to see if there's any defensive guidance, any detection content. None. Because it was dropped Christmas Eve, right? So I sit down, fire up my coding agent, spin up a dozen Docker containers and go to town, generating that attack data, analyzing it with the assistance of the LLM, the coding agent, and all that. And I was the first to publish defensive guidance and detection content for that. But let me tell you something. I would not have done it had I not had the force multiplier, the gains that I had with those tools. Because again, it's the day after Christmas and I'm not working, but I know I can get this done in record time, actually, if I utilize these tools. And so that's the kind of thing, right? We can do more, we can do it faster, but there's obviously infinite caveats and lots of different ways it can go wrong.
Daniel, I'm curious, Google, again, the scale that you guys operate at, are you seeing massive efficiencies in the way your security operations run?
Yeah. So in mentioning what Joshua touched upon earlier, kind of helping to automate that high volume, low context, cross telemetry management, right? So getting all those different data points and then not having to write integration patterns for each of them, figuring out the regex or what YAML I need over here, or, what JSON that one is. It's immensely improved that in the scale that it's every time I look at it, I'm just wow, I do not have to do integration, log integration, that kind of toil anymore. I can just kind of pull it all together. That's where we saw the hugest impact, because the volume of data that we get is immense. So we would need an army of people, and we usually had an army of people somewhere that originally would start to work on that. And then we had a couple, really good ninjas that would be like, this is my 23 line regex for you. And it go in and do that piece. So it eliminates needing that and helping you get to that other side faster. But that's where, and then touching upon what Eric said about how it helped him with Force Amplify working on that patch. We've also seen now at the same time, agentic attacks, where Josh was talking about the bad side of it, where an agentic attack would come in and it could rotate the credentials in a whole cloud environment in seconds, as soon as again, across the whole environment, right? So if you were a normal hacker, unless you already knew all those variables in that context, it would still take you a couple of minutes. The agent could come in and be like, query, bang, bang, it rotated all the credentials, done. I now own your cloud environment. So getting up to the point where you can detect that to get that defense, you have to scale your speed as well.
All right. So There's a growing field of AI SOC startups, each with unique approaches, and frankly, a lot of them are very cost prohibitive, as Joshua alluded to earlier. LLMs aren't super cheap. Max, without naming names, what's the architectural difference between platforms built for AI to operate versus platforms that bolted AI onto existing workflows? What breaks when you try and retrofit this?
I'm going to go back, I think, to something Daniel mentioned earlier. You kind of made the comment around calling APIs and MCP, and so I think what we've seen is 3 different categories there of ways of being built. So I think there's the one-off integrations, right? Which sadly, I would say is like where most of cybersecurity is, not in terms of organization, but in terms of volume of things that, like the surface of things that could be done. Meaning the vast majority of security vendors and like tools have some AI like integration, but the surface area that they can do that is actually, exposed to AI is like really small, right? So I think there's the one-off. There's the MCP integration, which there was like huge boom this year, which kind of enforced the same problems as the number one, meaning like this is like a problem we hit, right? We had like, I think our first version, we had 170 tools because we said, well, we want to expose all the things, and we were consuming something like 70,000 tokens. So that just does not work. And so the pure kind of MCP enforces in a way that you're going to expose very few tools. They're going to you're going to be driven to wrap a bunch of things together in those tools, right? Instead of saying, hey, make a query and, very narrow query, you might say, hey, find me data across these 8 different data sets. Like you're going to try to wrap it up so that, yes, it does a lot, but it kind of does it as one tool. And I think you lose the agency from that. You remove agency from the model because now the MCP server is enforcing it. And then the last one is APIs. And so I think it's it's a throwback in a way to like the good old APIs. Turns out to like be a huge part, I think, of the answer here. Somebody I was talking to recently kind of put it well. They were kind of getting reminded of the whole software will eat the world kind of concept that there was many years ago. And I think in a weird way, we're going back to this because now the models are able to leverage all of those APIs very, very easily. So going back to I think the root of the question, I think the big difference is who is fundamentally built for APIs, right? So if you've built something that is a GUI first, it's going to be a long road. If you've built a bunch of APIs that later on roll up as a GUI, I think that's kind of like the better pattern here. So in my opinion, that's kind of like the progression, but like what defines a specific tool that is the best for this. And I'll loop a little bit with what Eric mentioned earlier. Now there's the CLI tools, right? Which is a huge cheat code that just got introduced right in the middle of all of this, which is, it's like CLI turned out to be the best MCP in a weird way. So it's opened up a ton of things, but it kind of favors the same thing the way I think about it, right? There's security companies that have a CLI that allows you to get the list of detections, and that's it. Everything else you got to pay for to get access to a PDF that is behind paywalls, and is really hard to like try to get access to. And then there's the opposite, which is there's the the hyperscalers are a great example, right? Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS can do 100% through all of their CLIs. Therefore, like AIs have 100% coverage over those platforms. And that's amazing.
What I hope to see coming from it, and it's a term that makes me laugh every time I hear it now, because I feel like it's been decades, and Joshua's probably been fighting this battle that whole time, was all about self-healing and autonomic, right? So with the ML stuff they had before, because we've had that. I worked in banking before Google, and we had I've brought in stuff for oh, look, this can find behavioral anomalies, and we can turn things off. And they're like, well, who's going to approve turning it off? And it was you just always hit that hard stop. Nobody would let it go autonomic. And so as LLMs, I think, help loosen a little bit of the chain with non-determinism, that it's going to have a knock-on effect for things that do have some deterministic ML outputs as well, on acceptance on autonomic behaviors, that the 99% case is going to be okay versus it always has to be perfectly right. So I think that's going to, and when those platforms are tiered and tied for working and interfacing with AI as well, that'll smooth that out so that we can see that coming.
I can't wait. And that makes me very excited, Dan. We're in a risk business. You have to accept risk in security. One of the risks that the industry needs to accept is you can have a certain level of false positives in order to block the real attacks. And machine learning has a few more false positives than rules do. Well, this is a risk calculation. If you want to get through all of your evidence and get to the true positives, you better be willing to relax your rigor around, rule-based threat detection in order to get that added recall and protection that you need. So I think people are coming along with that. And I think the rise of LLMs popularity has helped us move towards that risk computation.
Yeah. Awesome. So go ahead.
I just said hallelujah.
It's been a long time. Right?
I'm really cognizant of time, so I'm just gonna try and close things off here. You guys can give me one or two sentences each. I just want to fast forward to late 2026 or 2027, sort of a prediction. What capability that sounds ambitious today will feel like table stakes by then? Eric, let's start with you. I know you're very keen on what's coming.
Oh, geez. I would have liked to have a couple minutes to maybe think on that one, because I feel like the features and innovations are coming so quickly. I'm doing my best just to stay on top of what's happening right now. And I follow it closely. I use it every day, all day. And so it's almost difficult for me to try to predict that far out because of the speed that it's moving. I'm I don't know if I'm imaginative enough to guess where it's going to be at the end of 2026, right? I know, Chris, you and I were talking earlier, about and these are kind of silly in my opinion, but it's a thing, I guess, to someone, is the browser, Atlas and Comet and these browsers with AI built into them. I said, I tried it out. It wasn't that effective. It wasn't that impressive. And I didn't really have that many use cases for it, but I was I'm sure that's going to get a lot better. And then and once it does, that's when I think regular people start to be taking part in agentic workflows, because regular people are not messing with Claude code and doing, things like this. But when you give them an app they already use every single day, and you say, hey, look, click this button, talk to the app, and it will do all the things. Now suddenly grandma's using it, and my parents are using it, and so that's something I think, Chris, is LLMs and AI, as we refer to it, is still very much nerd territory. What I think is likely to happen this year is we're going to see it really start to permeate into the non-nerd world, because there's a bajillion use cases and therefore money to be made. So usually follow the money, right? But I don't know. That's my unprompted, hadn't really considered it take.
Who wants the next one?
I'll jump in. So the big thing for me is where I hope to see it going, and I start to see it happen, and it ties into LLM strength being the natural language processing part of it, is that you're kind of moving from policy as code and needing to know the structure of those pieces of code and those policies to intent-based security, where you can just be keep this PII protected. and you pass that as what you want rather than learning the YAML string I need to pass to the system with those particular pieces in the definition. So like getting to that point where you can have that conversation to define what you want to end up having as that policy is like an intent-based security. And I think we're getting there. We're not quite there yet, but I think that's what will be big coming up over the next year.
Yeah, I'm going to borrow off of Eric and Daniel. Just hopefully this year, but I think definitely by 2027, I think we're going to see something that it sounds ambitious now, but I think it's inevitable. And that is just it's a natural language interface into your entire security operations. What does that mean? I mean, does that mean like a true AI native SIM that comes out and actually does things differently and gives you humans a natural language interface, but in the back end is doing a whole lot more, a whole lot more data science and true data analytics, things that have to happen in batch, things that have to happen in correlation, things that need to happen in real time. I don't know why that doesn't exist yet, to be honest. I feel like we have we have the raw materials to build it today. Mm-hmm. So I suspect this year we're probably going to see maybe there's those working in stealth right now to do this, but I don't know why we don't have a true AI native. I mean, if we still consider security operations and we'll call the SIM as like the core tech stack for it as being like human operated, then I don't know why our industry is built around the flaws of the SIM instead of the SIM being built to work around human analytical thinking.
You guys said really great things. Now I'm the last guy, so I'm really a threat detection guy, right? So I don't really think about. I mean, I think about the rest of security, but for me, my comments are about threat detection in particular. I think we're going to see several orders of magnitude lower false positives in the next couple of years. That we're finally starting to use the right inferential methods to identify the garbage and noise and get rid of it, contextualize through context. Vendors can't ship detectors that work for everybody. In fact, they don't work for anybody. And the edge cases and context are what determine whether something is bad or good for a given enterprise. So that sort of dynamic context acquisition, and I think Chris mentioned sort of just-in-time inference, given a piece of evidence, go figure out if it's bad or good, is accelerating quite a lot with LLM of AI SOC, sort of alert triage. That's also what Alpha Level does, little pitch, without LLMs. And I think so what does that do to the rest of the pipeline? Well, with a lot less noise, the human analysts are more empowered. They're missing less. They're getting through all of the stuff they need to get through. And then the automated systems to take actions as a result of the initial findings from is this something you need to worry about or not, are going to also accelerate as a result of better signal coming into the rest of that pipeline. So I'm excited about that. It's about time we stop showing analysts the same stupid alert every day of the week. It's about time we started clean up our mess. Yeah.
Yeah. I will start by saying I really hope ML comes through much more pervasively in the SOC, because I completely agree with you. Like it's incredible that we're not already there. So I appreciate you fighting the good fight. In terms of the LLM side of things, I think the frontier labs have reached escape velocity compared to cybersecurity in terms of the quality of the models. Meaning, what I don't think is going to happen is that there's going to be cybersecurity companies training really good models on cybersecurity stuff. I think the way we're going to get better, access in cybersecurity is from the general models. The amount of funds that are invested from those frontier labs is just insane. So they're going to keep getting way, way, way better. I think they're getting a lot more pull on better models than cheaper, smaller models. So I don't think we're going to see the level of, hey, I have models on everything running all the time and in an efficient way. I think we're more likely going to see more complex models that keep getting better at model recursion, right? I'm thinking of subagents that we're seeing, the value we're getting from the model itself, understanding subagents and being able to talk to close-knit other submodels to accomplish greater tasks. Like, that would be my bet, is that this ends up exploding even more, which explodes the cost, but that's a whole different thing. And then we end up with just like mind-blowing results. Now, whether we can leverage those results realistically in the SOC is a different thing, but that's my prediction.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for taking part in this conversation today. I know we went a little bit long, but I feel like we could just sit on this call for 6 hours and still have things to talk about. So really appreciate you taking the time. I'm about to hand this off to Ken Weston, who is going to demonstrate how LimaCharlie is operationalizing this in practice. A huge thank you to our panelists, Maxime, Eric, Josh, Daniel, and Chris, for this insightful discussion. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today.
Hello, my name is Ken Weston. I'm a senior solutions engineer here with LimaCharlie. I'm excited to show you folks some of the cool stuff that we've been working on with regards to integrating AI into our platform. I do have a few concepts I want to explain, just kind of give folks a little bit of overview of our platform, and as well as some of the concepts that around like AI, like MCP servers, kind of define those a little bit. And then we're going to jump into some actual use cases and then into the demo. So I like to start with kind of an overview of what our platform looks like. So with LimaCharlie, we are sort of a box of Legos. This is how we like to describe our product, because you can sort of build the security operations platform of your dreams. If you want to incorporate EDR, you want to do SIEM, we fulfill all these different use cases, whether it's, again, deploying our native EDR agent, or if you're ingesting logs from a cloud source or any other SaaS application, or even on-prem, we're able to ingest all of those logs. And of course, you have a full year of data retention that's searchable and within the platform. We also have incident response capabilities, integrating with tools like Velociraptor, and a lot of things we can do around automation. You might be familiar with our playbooks, integration with other SOAR platforms as well. But what's really interesting about our platform is not only that we have all these different capabilities and that we're multi-tenant, but everything that we do within our product, you can also do via our API. This has been since the company's origins, right? We are an API first company. A lot of our customers don't even sometimes use our UI. They interact with us purely via our API. Now, that allows us a lot of flexibility when it comes to integrating with some of these new AI tools. So NCP server, for example, basically we've surfaced everything that's available, almost everything that's available within the API that's available now in the MCP server. So you can do all sorts of things, everything from running queries, deploying agents, you name it. It's going to be able to do that through that tool. Now, we also want to be able to expand on that with integrating with some other tools like Claude Code, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, where not only do we want to be able to maybe integrate specifically with our MCP server, but maybe we want to interact with AWS via the command line or some of those other tools as well. And that's where we're going to show a demo a little bit in just a little bit. So some key concepts we want to talk about here is that an MCP server, which is a model context protocol, really it's just a switchboard, right? It's a way for these AI tools to talk to other services, right? So within LimaCharlie, again, we're able to talk to our server and interact with pretty much everything that we can do via our API. So we also then have some additional things around Claude skills, which are more specific, which provide additional context around some of that, like specific API calls. It describes a little bit more to Claude Code about what it actually does. So when you maybe run a query or you want to deploy an agent, it has a pretty good understanding of how to go about doing that without having to ask you too many questions. So just kind of wanted to level set on some of that terminology, as well as an overview of our platform. And then we have our repo with all of the different AI goodness that's available in our public repo. And in that folder, you'll also see a number of these different skills, as I mentioned earlier. These are all available for you to go ahead and you can take a look at that as well. And of course, you can also, create your own, right? So you can extend this quite a bit for your own personal environment. There's a QR code there if you want to scan and get access to that repo. We'll also share the link in the QR code at the end of this demo as well. So just you can take a look at that in just a few minutes. So a couple examples of some use cases that you can leverage with our AIs, particularly with Claude. Again, the reporting capabilities, you'll see that early on where we actually have Claude Code integrated actually into the product itself. It's perfect for getting general questions about your environment, about the health of your environment, the number of sensors, what versions things are running. You can even run like MITRE attack reports, which I'll show an example of. Maybe you want to ask questions around authentication and things like that as well. And then like detection engineering, right? You can get reports around, DNR, some of the detection and response rules. You also can leverage it for looking at false positives, right? So which are our noisiest alerts? How can it tune it? And you can leverage Claude Code to be able to do that as well. And we have an example that we'll show in just a bit. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to jump into the actual demo portion of it. And again, we're going to share some resources at the end of this demo here. So pay attention and we'll provide those resources at the end. And I'll see you in just a bit. So here I'm going to show you how you can leverage Claude Code from directly within the LimaCharlie UI. You'll see this friendly little robot guy over here. So we can go ahead and click in here. I've already started a session. Immediately when I started the session, it automatically connected to the MCP server. It also loaded all of the various skills that I'm going to be needing to be able to run some various commands. So here, for example, let me just start with running a simple command to identify what orgs do I have access to. So after a little bit of time, it shows all of the different orgs that I have access to, as well as the org ID. I can also ask more specific questions about things such as how many sensors do I have in a particular org? So then it gives me a breakdown of all the different containers and the types that I have within this environment. So this is really helpful just to kind of ask some very administrative tasks. It's almost like, managers can get a lot of information from this. So I can even get an idea of maybe what my MITRE attack coverage looks like. Analyze my detections, EDR specific detections. Alrighty, so there we have it. So we have a pretty comprehensive breakdown of what this looks like. I can also output this as a HTML document, but it does a pretty good job. I don't have a lot of detections in this environment, but it does sort of give you an idea of kind of what your coverage looks like, kind of the different techniques that are covered. You can also ask it to make recommendations about additional detections as well that might help kind of shore up some of that coverage as well. So this is just an overview of kind of what it looks like within the UI. Next, we're going to jump into VS Code, where we're actually going to be operating more on the terminal, where we're also going to be incorporating not just LimaCharlie in the MCP server, but also be able to tap into some of the command line tools such as AWS and GitHub and things like that. So let's jump into that next. Today, I'm going to be walking you through how to leverage Claude Code as well as LimaCharlie's MCP server to deploy a sensor to an AWS EC2 instance. Now, I've already authenticated the LimaCharlie MCP server here in my environment. I've also authenticated the AWS command line environment. So all of that's authenticated. So Claude Code has full access to all of that. So you can see here, I have access to my LimaCharlie environment. I also have access to my AWS environment here. As you can see, I have one EC2 instance that's been deployed, and that's where I'm going to be deploying my my Linux sensor that I have on the LimaCharlie side. So as you can see here in my code, I have authenticated with my MCP server, and I ask it a simple question. In my organization, can demo environment create an installation key that's required for when I create or deploy a sensor? And then I want you to deploy an EDR sensor to AWS via the command line. And it's funny, I didn't mention EC2, but it's funny, it automatically didn't even correct it, and it was able to figure out that that's what I was referring to because it was the only instance that was set up. And you can even see here that it's actually making some queries here regarding AWS. And then we also see that there are some other actions that are happening here. With Claude Code, it's doing a lot of configuration, generating, creating a lot of different scripts and things that are required for it. But in the very end, it went ahead and it was able to get that deployed. And I can actually verify that this was successfully detected here in just a minute when I go over into my LimaCharlie environment. But you can see here, it was able to do this deployment, no problem at all. And now if I go ahead and I switch over, if I go into my sensors, I will find that there is this IP. You see that this is US West. So this is the AWS sensor where I've deployed that particular sensor. I can see when it was last seen. I can also then view on the timeline to make sure that that telemetry is actually flowing through. And it is. So this sensor has been successfully deployed. Now, I just did this one-to-one EC2 instance. Of course, you could do this to multiple. You can even tag these assets, right? So I could say, I want you to deploy in this region, in this particular environment. I want you to add this particular tag in the LimaCharlie environment, maybe if it's dealing with PCI compliance or something like that. I can also take additional actions here, like I could put these sensors into sleeper mode. I could do all of that from within this environment. Now, this was all within Claude Code. I'm using VS Code for this environment because I was able to use this because I wanted to have access to the AWS command line. So we're going to expand on this use case a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to speed up the clock here once I get the prompt filled out. But we're going to be looking at onboarding a customer where we have multiple cloud environments from AWS, Azure, GCP, as well as DigitalOcean. So we're going to ask the Claude Code here to go ahead and help us out with onboarding those data sources automatically. Now we're going to accelerate the clock here, let Claude do its magic. You can see we have authentication that's occurring. We see that it's actually going out and looking at what available data sources are there. It's also going to be going to go ahead and deploy the EDR sensors to AWS, similar to what we saw before with the EC2 instances in the prior example. And again, this takes about 16 minutes or so. And we have a number of different skills that are helping to sort of drive this. I have authenticated all of the different command line tools for these different cloud environments automatically. And we have a skill that automatically looks for those and makes those connections. So as long as you have the right permissions to go in and deploy tools and things like that, you shouldn't have any issues. Now, if you're a large organization, you probably want to take a little bit more of a stepped approach to this, where you may deploy based on maybe EC2 instances and then bring in CloudTrail and at least have it prompt you a little bit more. But if it's a smaller organization, you can see how rapidly we're able to do this. This is something that probably take a few hours if you're doing it manually, but leveraging Claude Code and the LimaCharlie AI skills, we're able to do this very rapidly. So now let's move into another helpful use case where not only are we going to create an organization, but we also want to maybe deploy some rules as well as integrate with GitHub. So in this next example, we are going to go ahead and create another tenant. This one we're going to call Bob's Plumbing. And with this, we're going to also deploy our Sigma rules, which are community rules that are free and available on the platform. And then we're also going to enable our GetSync extension. Now, what that allows us to do is it'll automatically create a GitHub repo. It'll add that extension, and then we're going to be able to sync not only those detection rules, but also all of the configurations for this particular tenant. And now we're going to go ahead and fast forward the clock just to show you how quickly this runs. It does ask a few questions, just a couple of prompts. And then we're able to create this. And of course, it creates the GitHub repository, also gets everything else configured on the LimaCharlie side. So we can then now manually go through and update that. And we can now sync it with our tenant. And we can also replicate this to create additional organizations. So next, we want to see how we can actually apply Claude Code to some of our false positives that we may have in our environment. So we may have some noisy alerts. And so this allows us to go in and Claude Code will analyze the detection logic as well as some of the alerts that get triggered. And it's going to offer us some recommendations in terms of false positive rules that might be applied to help suppress some of those noisy alerts, whether it's based on syntax errors or other logic that might be modified to help, again, reduce some of those false positives. Now, again, we're going to run our prompt here, and I'm going to accelerate the clock. And you can see that it's doing its magic. It's looking at some of the rules and the frequency. It then identifies 3 of those rules that we can make changes to, and then makes recommendations for false positive rules that we can then apply to our environment. Now, this is something we can run in a regular scheduled interval if we wish to constantly improve the overall efficiency of our detection logic. So let's look at another really fun use case. So let's say there is a new security incident that happened. There's a bunch of articles on it. There are actually some indicators of compromise or IOCs that are available. We can actually tell Claude Code to go out and actually grab that article. And with the combination of Claude Code, our skills, and our MCP server, it's smart enough to know that this is an IOC. It's able to create a lookup or a couple of lookups for these IOCs that then also incorporates that into several new detection rules. So not only can we search historical records, we can also write new detection rules based on that, and then we'll be able to identify anytime any of these IOCs are in that environment. So I've accelerated the clock here, and we have some outputs. So we can see that a number of lookups were created, and we also have a number of rules that have already been deployed automatically for us.
Thank you for being here today. You just saw the Agentic SecOps Workspace in action, AI that doesn't just advise, but operates your security infrastructure with full visibility and control at every step. If you want to get your hands on this today, you can get started for free at LimaCharlie.io. No credit card, no sales call required. Spin up a tenant and connect Claude Code and start exploring the possibilities. If you want a guided tour of what we showed you today, book a demo with our team on our website. We'll walk you through how ASW fits into your specific workflows. And if you want to stay connected, join our community at community.limacharlie.io. That's where the practitioners are sharing what they're building and pushing the limits of what's possible. Thanks again. Now go build something.